6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
How about we do it again?
6, 7, 4, 3, 2, 1. I think I farted.
Okay, let's try one more
I
time.
definitely.
Ready?
Making review. Making review. Making review.
Say 6,
6,
5,
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Oh my goodness, you guys, it is episode 206 of Rank and Review, and it is the second last bunker episode. I watched 31 movies, read 3 books, and watched the entire first season, which is over 30 episodes, of the Twilight Zone. And I tried to, keep notes and try to amass this material so that I'd have a good backlog so I can help get more episodes out there in the age of COVID, where I've been finding recording harder and harder to do. And for my dear listeners who have been with me through these episodes, some of these episodes have been hard-fought battles. Either I'm working against the clock, or with my first episode in particular, I had a batch of really tough movies. But I really want to thank you guys for sticking it out with me. And as part of my gratitude, I'm going to offer you a really solid bunker episode, I think. I don't have a lot of, audio issues this one time. There's no echo. There's one interview with my dear friend Scott Lehmann over the phone that sounds like it's over the phone, but I think it's very easy on the ears. I don't feel as rushed, and I think I was just getting more used to talking to myself by the time this episode came out. So I'm not apologizing for this episode the way I feel like. I didn't want the bunker episodes to feel like filler, and I admit that a couple of them might feel like filler. This episode, I don't think should feel like filler. We got 3 retro horror movies that, somehow slipped through the net of the culture, or that I've just been meaning to get my eyes to and that somehow failed. And then we've got 3 more modern pieces that, either because of the digital age or because of international distribution or mystery to me, I can't seem to easily get my hands to it in Canada. But I did find a way to watch them all in time to record this bunker episode. So, yes, we got 6 movie reviews, and then we have a book report on Devolution by Max Brooks, the author of World War Z. And it's, I think, going to be a fun episode. I hope you enjoy it. As usual, you can check out my website at rankandreview.ca. That's RANKNREVIEW .ca. And then to email me, it's rankandreview@gmail.com. That's RANKNREVIEW@gmail.com. I drop every other Wednesday, and if you're looking for something else to put in your ears, my friend Jason Dubray has a podcast called The Shelf Shedding Movie Show, and I think you should give that a go. And all that behind us, let's get into the second to last bunker episode. Horror plays hard to get.
Who is Mr. Frost?
No one has been able to turn up the slightest clue regarding Frost's identity. There's no official trace of him anywhere.
What has he done?
And in 2 years he hasn't uttered a single word?
Frost is not mentally ill, Dr. Day. He has no place in your hospital.
What does he want with us?
So in fact, who are you?
I'm the Gaga Man. Boo.
He spoke to you.
I'm not afraid of him.
It used to be simple. Good on one hand, evil on the other. There was a struggle. But then you came along, the scientists, the geniuses.
What do you want from us? What do you want from me?
As somebody who has spent a lot of time on stage and actually doing some acting in the real world, not just in my imaginations, at least once upon a time, I am sort of fascinated with roles that have been played by many different actors. And when we're talking about something as big and impossible to fully interpret as the visage of the devil, as this source of all of the evil in the world, as the source of all temptation in the world, and also with that little hint of the rebellion, this is a fallen angel. This is someone who not only had the knowledge that God was real and created him, but chose to rebel against it. And, there's a lot of ways to play it. Is he glad to be where he is, or is he unhappy to be where he is? Is it a male? Is it a female? Does it consider these types of things? Does it consider these types of questions when it's sitting down across from someone? When it's trying to make a deal, buy a soul, or just sow chaos into the world? And, when you're playing a villain, or you're playing, somebody who's motivated to do bad, a lot of actors will take the treatise that, you got to find a way to like your character. You got to get behind his eyes and behind his motivations and let him, at least, or her, justify to themselves why they're doing what they're doing. And with most villains, that'll work for you. But with Satan, with the devil, it's interesting. So whenever an actor who I respect plays the role of the devil, I kind of pay attention. And there's been no shortage of them. Vincent Price, Tim Curry, Robert De Niro, Jack Nicholson, Viggo Mortensen, Max von Sydow, Al Pacino, and actually one that I quite like that maybe gets not shouted out as much is Tom Waits. All of these people have played the devil to varying degrees of success. And when it comes up in conversation, people will often mention how De Niro made his devil act and look a lot like Martin Scorsese, or laugh at how over the top Al Pacino's, just Pacino'd the shit out of it. But if someone was to ask me who I thought did the most interesting take on the devil, my answer would be Jeff Goldblum. And the movie would be Mr. Frost from 1990. It's a British film. I believe it's a British film. It's directed by a French person, though, named Philippe Setbon. And it is about a man named Mr. Frost who is arrested by police for killing 24 people. And he basically, once the police show up, doesn't do anything to hide his crimes. He tells them where they're buried and is very polite and concise and calm about it. Now, I said earlier, talking with regards to Al Pacino, how, he Al Pacino'd the hell out of his, his version of the devil. Jeff Goldblum does not vanish here. He's still full of all the same tics and pauses and sort of furrowed brows and big eyes that he always puts into his performance. But I see him thinking, I see him calculating, and I see the way he looks at everyone around them and the way he examines them. This is a devil who isn't suffering, who doesn't hate where he's at, but who really, really resents humanity for not taking him seriously. We are half-hearted. We're in our heads. We believe in nothing. We think nowadays that we don't need Mr. Frost, but where's our enthusiasm? There's no passion. There's no life. These words come out of Jeff Goldblum's mouth in one of many, many confrontational scenes between he and Kathy Baker, who's a psychiatrist at the institute where he's wound up, who's trying to get him to speak, get him to explain why he's done the things he's doing. He's not interested in psychology. No, Mr. Frost wants to be believed in. And he sets out to torture this psychiatrist and to convince her that despite everything she's learned, despite everything she's dedicated her life to, that scary supernatural things do exist. The boogeyman exists. Bigfoot exists. The devil exists. And the devil's kind of pissed off that he's not being taken more seriously. So you still have a lot of room here for sort of satire, some weird sort of dark humor, and you still get, if you're a fan of Jeff Goldblum, which I think everybody knows I am, you get a lot of Jeff Goldblum doing his Jeff Goldblum thing. But I think the movie works. I think it gets to you. And this is 1990. This is right around the time where Silence of the Lambs was coming out. And I would actually compare the confrontation between Jeff Goldblum and Kathy Baker and Mr. Frost to the confrontation that happens in Silence of the Lambs between Jodie Foster and Anthony Hopkins. Now, that's a pretty large mantle to sort of compare this small, underseen British or European film, but it's how I feel. I also want to talk about Alan Bates, who's also a supporting role as this guy Deitweiler, who sees who Mr. Frost is right away and is again a victim of him, and who tries to help Kathy Baker, but also convince her that, yeah, this guy is indeed on the level. Actually, Alan Bates and Kathy Baker, I think, have something in common, like consistently working actors for a long time. Well, Alan Bates has kind of slowed down since he passed away, but while he was active, he was very active in a lot of films, and Kathy Baker's still doing a lot of it, a lot of work, and consistently good in the stuff she's in. But neither of them ever really popped. And this was before, Jeff Goldblum was always Jeff Goldblum, and The Fly had happened, but I don't think he was the draw that he is even today, at the time that this was released. But it's interesting, Baker and Bates, just always solid, never fully appreciated, and they both get to work off of each other in this film, and as usual, they do a fine job of it. But to be fair, it is Jeff Goldblum's show. There's also a very brief scene with Vincent Schiavelli, who's an actor who I've always been impressed with. He usually does small roles in films, and whenever I see him, I'm like, hey, Vincent, there you are, buddy. And it's just one of the many things about the movie that I enjoyed.
You took a few years and undid centuries of effort. It used to be simple, good on one hand, evil on the other. There was a struggle. We had a game, and yes, we made it up. But then you came along, the scientists, the geniuses. You couldn't care less about the human spirit. You're in your heads. You're half-hearted. You believe in nothing. There was a time when people sold their souls to me for youth or wealth. Well, these days I know you think you don't need Mr. Frost, but where's your enthusiasm? There's no passion. There's no life.
So what do you want from us? What do you want from me?
I must reveal to the world your impotence in the presence of the age-old power of the wild side.
This is all very general, Mr. Frost.
No, it's very specific, Dr. Day. Tell me, in your opinion, what would be what's the worst thing that a psychiatrist in this second millennium could do to one of her patients? What would be that one irreparable act?
The setting of the institution, too, with all of these, unfortunate souls suffering, some of them looking to Mr. Frost at some sort of awe, some of them intuitively frightened of him, and what a playground this is for him. These people are already damaged, and it would be so easy for him to push them over the edge. So he clocks the patients that are, Kathy Baker's favorite, and he messes with them, and he causes terrible things to happen. And whenever she thinks she's made a point against him, he throws it right back in her face with that smugness, that Jeff Goldblum smugness that becomes increasingly frustrating to her, but kind of enjoyable from the audience standpoint. Like, she keeps on thinking that she's going to be able to convince him of something or score some points against him. And the longer she continues to lose this debate, this competition, this whatever it is between them, the more unharried that she becomes. All of this would be interesting enough, and the idea of, faith versus science, there's not a lot new here, but there's a brilliant twist that happens towards the 2/3 of the way through the movie, and I really do think it's the moment where the Kathy Baker character convinces herself that no matter what she's been able to put aside or to tell herself or to dismiss from the past, this is the thing that convinces her. And that thing is when she gets a panicked phone call from her brother, who is disabled, who'd spent most of his life in a wheelchair. And when she goes to see him, he gets out of the chair, and he's amazed, and he's happy, and he doesn't know how to react. And she's terrified. Mr. Frost did something wonderful for her and her brother. And that was the thing that convinced her that not only was he on the level, but that he needed to be stopped. that he needed not just to be stopped, but to be stopped by his own psychiatrist. And this, of course, is the end game. This is what Mr. Frost wanted the whole time. By being destroyed by a figurehead of science, a well-placed psychiatrist who lived her life in the world that was real, for her to so completely buy into the reality of Satan that she would literally pull the trigger on him is a victory. And it works, A lot of the times, when the bad guys win or when the devil wins, it's like in The Omen or Rosemary's Baby or anything like that. But it's sort of like this surprise thing, this gambit, Yeah, maybe Mr. Frost was playing a rigged game and maybe there was no way she could win this game. But he feels the stakes to it. Like there's something there for him. He wants recognition, and in his mind, he's going to get this recognition. And he gets it, and we're not exactly happy for him. And whatever happens after the credits roll to Kathy Baker, she's no longer going to be a psychiatrist. Whether or not she joins her patients, whether or not she's really asked to pay the price for what's going on here, we don't know. It's all left for us to wrestle with. But so few films will leave me thinking about it after I walk away from it. And Mr. Frost I saw on Super Channel in like 1991 or 92. And it has never left my mind. Is part of it because I'm a big Goldblum fan? Maybe. Is part of it, like I said in the introduction, my sort of fascination with people playing these big ideals of figures and how they're going to interpret such an idea? Absolutely. All of that is true. But I think front to back, start to finish, Mr. Frost works. And it's lost. Like, I guess it airs occasionally on TV in England and stuff like that, but a lot of people who I talk to just have no idea what this movie is. It's not available in any physical medium other than VHS that I'm aware of. And if it's on a streaming service, I don't know where it is. It's an unsung horror thriller. I don't know if I would say masterpiece. It is a little bit cheaply made. Some of the performances are more convincing than others. But the central conceit, the script, and the execution by the leads make it more than worthwhile. And especially in this day and age where Jeff Goldblum seems to be like more popular than ever, and he has his own documentary series. Why not, re-release this, get this out there, let people enjoy and find Mr. Frost, or let them disagree with me. I mean, I think a lot of people would be curious enough just by Jeff Goldblum playing the devil to check it out. So I invite you to seek it out and wish you luck seeking it out. I have a VHS copy of it. And that's what I mean by lost movies. And that's what's the double-edged sword of this digital age that we're finding ourselves in. For all of the new movies we get access to, there are so many we have lost. Let's try not to make Mr. Frost one of them. About host and random Canadian Larry Parsons this bunker episode. If someone was to ask me if I was claustrophobic, I would say, yeah, maybe a little bit. But if I was to wonder, like, am I more stressed out, like, by big spaces or little spaces? It's a tricky one for me. I would say I'm less agoraphobic and more claustrophobic. And yet, sometimes intimidatingly large vistas can be strange. Like, it sounds weird to say, me living in the middle of the Great Plains, but yes, there are things that can be too big, and there are definitely things that can be too small. But I'm not agoraphobic. I think the word would be, I hope this is right, thalassophobic, which is fear of the ocean. I don't like the idea of, floating on this limitless source of water full of things that I don't understand and that will probably eat me. The water itself is a danger. And unless you absolutely know what you're doing and you're in a very seafaring, well put together boat or ship, you are surrounded by death. So I've never really understood people who really enjoyed the ocean, who spent their life at sea. If it's your job, that's one thing, but I don't understand people who love the ocean because I find it troubling. And here we find ourselves on the edge of a new frontier of space exploration. And for us people, us thalassophobics, if that is the right word, we move on to astrophobic. And I can only imagine that my terror of the ocean and its vastness and its unknown quantities would be magnified by a millennium in outer space. Who's to say a micro-sized, little piece of stone wouldn't fly right through your ship and destroy everything, your life support, the radiation in space. It's not even just the lack of oxygen and the water's willingness to drown you. Space is frozen and it's radiated, and apparently it smells like burning meat. And, the vastness of it is hilarious. And as far as we know, there's nothing like us out there, or anything that is alive out there that we can see or understand would likely be microscopic to our eyes. And then there's these thoughts like all of our technology as we move forward seems to be getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So we start wondering, maybe the reason that we haven't seen, our alien neighbors is because their tech evolved similar to ours. And for all we know, they're already here and they've been watching us for a long time. They just don't want to be seen. We want to see them. They don't want to see us. This unending mystery that is space travel, that is outer space. And what would that day be like? That seemingly necessary, maybe inevitable day, when it's confirmed we are not alone. When that really does come to be, that there are other things in the world. We are not the center of the universe. We are not the beginning of the universe. We are not the start. We are not the finish. We are just a piece of it. And what will that do to the human ego? What will that do to things like religion? What would the fallout be? Horror and science fiction, I think, are probably the purest blend of genres we've gotten since, horror and comedy. But this is the new frontier. What used to be, these stories of pirates and ocean-faring vessels and life at sea, the new age will now be that of outer space. And we're at the very terrifying beginning where there is just so much more that we don't know than what we do. Arguably, horror science fiction was perfected in the late 70s with Ridley Scott's Alien, but there's been a lot of good ones, and I want to talk about a 2020 film from Russia called Sputnik.
Мы привезли пассажира из космоса. Он внутри вас.
Я должен иметь возможность уничтожить его, если все выйдет из-под контроля.
Помоги мне, Таня.
Ищите к себе в Москву, пока можете.
Мы рискуем жизнью человека. Героя Советского Союза.
Если герой, значит готов ко всему, в том числе и пожертвовать собой.
Почему я? Прости.
Он адаптируется.
Бегите. Вы меня не знаете.
Это вы себя не знаете.
Now, I know I'm not allowed to say anything good about Russia right now because that damn Putin is causing all sorts of problems in the world, but I don't think we should punish their film industry for it. It also got kind of demolished distribution sort of payout because of COVID. So it's one that kind of got lost in the shuffle, and because it's an international, release, it's hard to get your hands on a copy. I think it is available now in some streaming sites, but when I was doing my bunker project in October of 2020, the movie was being talked about, but it was a really hard movie to actually put in front of you and see. I would say the closest ancillary to Sputnik was a recent science fiction movie called Life, starring Jake Gyllenhaal. The creature in both of those movies look like they could be from the same planet. Maybe not the same species of alien, but they look like they're made of the same stuff. So to add to our education on different phobias, on top of fear of space and fear of vastness, I think the other thing that this movie plays on is something called carcerophobic, or carcerophobia, which is fear of incarceration. And that's the really interesting thing, too, that about Sputnik that I really appreciate. It kind of enters into this little mini subgenre of science fiction horror that we've been getting a lot of lately. Monster in a box thrillers like Splice or Morgan or Ex Machina. We have this new creature or this created creature, but we don't know what it's capable of. So it's being studied and it's being, tested. But by nature of being studied and tested, it's also kind of being imprisoned. In Sputnik, it's added this extra layer of things that our imprisoned astronaut, Konstantin, the creature actually is symbiotic with him. It is inside of him. It erupts from his throat, usually when he's sleeping, to do its business. But, unfortunately, it's not a cuddly, friendly E.T. It does kill people. I think the thing that gives Sputnik its real bite is that it's actually, also on top of being a science fiction horror, it's kind of a historical set thriller. It's a history piece. It's happening during the Cold War. These astronauts encounter something before re-entry, and they crash. One of the astronauts is killed, and another one of the astronauts is forever immobilized, and the third astronaut, Konstantin, has this thing in him. And it's interesting. They send this troubled psychiatrist, and you'd wonder why they would pick such a controversial woman. She was almost, about to lose her job, and they select her to do this super secret study with Konstantin. So Titania, who's our psychiatrist, is trying to get to know this guy and both figure him out and figure out what the powers that be want from him. So that's where things start to get a little bit familiar. Yeah, we have seen monster in a box thrillers, and Konstantin seems like he's an innocent victim, but a lot of bodies are piling up to the left and right. And of course, what are the motivations of the powers that be? Do they have everyone's best interests at heart? No, not in a sci-fi horror movie. Almost never, right? So that's when things start to get familiar. But the presentation, and especially, like I said, the historic context, lends the film this weird feeling of importance or historic document. And it's funny because it is pretty pulpy when you get down to it. It's not wall-to-wall teeth and tissue, but when our bug finally does erupt and we see it do its business, it is formidable, and a lot of people die. And there's, of course, our main military villain, Samirodov, I believe was his name. I'm probably saying, my Russian's not ideal. But they create this really good, hateable villain. There's lots of good reveals with him that, when we finally get our payoff, the alien's not good, but this guy might almost be worse. So there's lots of different adversaries and layers to the stakes in the movie that make it work. I think maybe the fact that it is subtitled and that it is in Russian adds that extra layer. I don't know, there's something about, because I don't see a lot of international films, I almost put a stamp of extra importance on one that these ones are so well loved that they want the world to see it. It's not just going to be for genre fans in Russia. They want to share this picture with the world. And usually you can get really interesting films that way, and this is no exception. Much like I talked about Night Watch and Day Watch, these other Russian films, or maybe those were German. I hope I'm not wrong about that. Sometimes people lower their expectations as far as production value for a foreign film. And sometimes you're right to, but in this case you shouldn't be. This looks as good And it is as accessible as any science fiction thriller you're going to see. It just happens to have subtitles. And again, I much prefer the subtitles to the dubbed, but here's the thing that I could put out there. Since it's weird and awkward anyway for me to do the dub, how about you dub everybody with fun Russian accents? I don't know. Maybe that's just for your host and random Canadian, because another thing that you may not know about me, I really love accents. I love accents. English, Russian, accents do it for me. So yeah, Sputnik is definitely worth any genre person's attention. Hopefully by the time this is hitting your ears, it's more available than it was when I recorded this. But sometimes horror plays hard to get because we feel like we don't need this piece of horror. Like maybe if you read the box, an alien being studied, Russian, astronauts, maybe this isn't going to jump out for you. I'm here for you guys, though. I am your friend. I am your host and random Canadian Larry Parsons, here to tell you that Sputnik is worth checking out. If you liked Life, if you like movies like Morgan, this is right in that niche.
Welcome to Garth Manor. In order to be a member of Alpha Sigma Rho, one has to do what? To stay in Garth Manor one night. And why is this night so special?
Because 12 years ago, Raymond Garth murdered his family here and then committed suicide.
And when the police arrived, they discovered a note written by Raymond Garth describing the entire gruesome act. But strangely, they only discovered 3 dead bodies. Andrew is still believed by some to be living somewhere within this house.
Hey, let's party! Quaaludes and Jack Daniels.
Oh my gosh. This is one radical chick. All right!
Now the fun begins.
Hey!
Robin Hood to the rescue! Woohoo!
Hell Night is sort of a classic form, like students in trouble kind of horror slasher thriller. It's got a lot of things going on. There might be a ghost story in here somewhere. There might be a subterfuge in here, but like basically it's the classic pretty people go someplace they shouldn't and they get whittled down. It's directed by Tom DeSimone and it stars the hot at the time Linda Blair. A bunch of college pledges are asked to spend a night locked in this gated, deserted mansion, which has of course, sinister history. They have to stay the night there as sort of a pledge, and that way they can, be part of the cool clubs in the university. So we have several things going on. We have the question of whether or not this place is actually haunted. We have a bunch of students who have planted a bunch of false scares and like sound cues and stuff like that to deliberately try to freak out the students that are being put through this game. And we have a legit, huge, frightening, monstrous serial killer in the works. And all of these balls are sort of going in the air. I guess one of the notes that I did have about the movie is that once it's set up and on the roll, it kind of feels like there's 3 different movies happening that occasionally intersect with each other. We have the story about the guys that are manipulating all of these pranks and false scares and what's going on with them. And we have the story of these 2 couples, the 2 that are constantly trying to have sex and the 2 that are just getting to know each other. And then we have the one guy who manages to get out of the place and is trying to get help and bring it back. And there's these 3 movies going on, and they don't feel like they really belong or are comfortable together somehow. I guess I like each of the individual movies at points by themselves, but together there's this weird, vague messiness to the proceedings. The other thing is Linda Blair was really popular for a time there, and in the late 70s and early 80s, they were trying like hell to make her a star. And she would do movies that like would look good on paper. It would make sense. This will be a popular movie. Like she'll do a disco musical because people were going to disco musicals at the time. And she'll make a sequel to The Exorcist because, well, you got to get that money. And she's showing up in a lot of horror movies as a brand name. And as much as I do think she was amazing in The Exorcist, she's a young actress, and she had a lot of help in The Exorcist. She had a makeup work about her, that she had another woman supplying her voice when she was possessed a lot of the time. So she had help. And when it moved on to seeing Linda Blair outside of The Exorcist, I think what we have is a capable, decent actress and young woman who got thrown way in the deep end of the pool, perhaps before she was ready for it. So there's always been something a little... She's not bad. There's just something awkward or maybe a little bit off about Linda Blair for me, especially in some of her early performances. And I would count Hell Night as one of those as well. So it basically works as a slasher. Sorry?
She's fine in this, though. I mean, she's fine in this. I don't think she's asked to do a whole lot of, heavy kind of acting when you're in a slasher film. I think she plays her role of the nice girl pretty well.
She smiles a lot.
Yeah. She screams.
Yeah.
That's it.
Pretty much.
Scream, walk around with lots of cleavage showing.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, and like, I guess she's doing the job, but like, I didn't feel strength from her. I didn't feel like the final girl kind of. She was the final girl because she was the star of the movie, not because she had this tenacity in her, this strength, or this like. I believed her as a survivor. She was just the necessary, component of this slasher movie. But I'm sounding really dismissive. At the end of the day, do the suspense scenes work and do the kill scenes work? Largely, yes, I do. And I think that's what most people are paying for when they, are going to watch a retro slasher movie like Hell Night. And it's also not as awkward, and it's aged fairly smoothly by comparison to a lot of these kind of 80s slashers. There's still something kind of charming and innocent about it. It hasn't come completely gnarly and awful and mean-spirited yet. We're still allowed to have fun.
I think part of that is because of the whole gothic feel of this movie, with it taking place in this big Garth Manor, which is a great location for a horror film. It's a creepy mansion that they have to stay in, and it's the whole that's the classic movie idea of you have to spend one night in this haunted house and you win, you can be in this sorority or you can win $1 million, whatever it is in that movie. It's been done before and many times, but that's kind of the basic setup, right?
Yeah.
And now with that, they're all wearing costumes. It's a costume party as well. So with that, it kind of gives it a period look almost and adds to that gothic feel. And almost makes it a bit more timeless. It doesn't have that 80s look to it necessarily.
Yeah, the costumes help that. Yeah.
The film has a 1981 feeling when it starts, your credit sequence and, the party and just that whole thing. And I love that about it because 1981 feel, I get sucked in already and I relax because that's my jam. But I do think it was smart with them going for the costumes.
Yeah.
When they all look like they're from a different period, they kind of fits the mansion rather than them walking around in jeans and sweaters or whatever they would be wearing. That I think would make it scream a bit more 80s. So
And
that was probably a good call for them.
in 1981, it would be the fashion and the music that would do the most to take us out of it. And they keep the score very traditional horror movie. And yeah, you're right. They don't have the crazy big 80s hair or like the hilarious fashions going on to distract you. Generally speaking, I don't think it should matter what people are wearing or what they look like. I kind of have to let it go. I just sort of like, this is the way people talked at this time. This is the way people dressed at this time. Yeah. And usually I can let it go. But there's something specific about certain 80s movies where it just becomes so ridiculous that it is hard to take seriously sometimes.
Yeah, and I guess what I'm just saying is I think the costumes were a good idea for this.
Yeah.
Just to add that sort of haunted house feel to it.
I don't know if they mentioned.
It all fit together.
I'm not sure they mentioned why. I don't think it's Halloween. I think it was just part of the party that it was a costume party or something. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think so. And then so the film does turn into a slasher film eventually. It takes a little bit while to get going in that direction.
Yeah.
But once it starts, it's actually done with some style and a little bit of class. They don't linger a whole lot on the gore shots.
Yeah.
There are some good kills that do occur. They're kind of that, for the most part, flash kind of quick edits. But
exactly what we would have been seeing in the Friday the 13th of the time. Like you just see a 2-second quick shot, but it's enough that you know what happened, and you're like, ooh, grisly, and it's good. Speaking of Friday the 13th, actually, Peter Barton, who's playing the love interest to Linda Blair in this movie. And they spend the whole movie making goo-goo eyes at each other and flirting. And she seems about ready to give in to him before the shit finally hits the fan. He was killed. That actor was killed by Jason Voorhees in part 4, I want to say. He had his head smashed into a wall in a shower.
Into the shower, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that's not a plus or a minus to this movie, but way to get killed way to get killed in 2 different slasher movies. And his character was the closest they came to like a surprise death for me. Like, I thought maybe the 2 of them might get out of this one since they'd spent so much time building the relationship between the 2 of them. But no, he gets thrown out a window.
Yeah, it was looking that way. One thing that I will, maybe a small complaint if you are negative maybe, is there are lots of really quiet, long moments, like long takes, where a character hears a noise on the other side of the room, so they walk across the room very quietly and very slowly.
Yeah.
And it would take them about 2 minutes to cross the room. And they do this repeatedly. And I think if you do that once, it creates tension. But they do it several times, and it starts to make things drag a bit after the 3rd and 4th time that they're walking across the room really slowly and quietly.
It gets exacerbated with repetition. It's true. It's also because the first half of the movie, we know that most of these scares are fake. It's too early in the movie for the real stakes to be ramping up yet. So we know a lot of the times when we're being quote fooled, we're not fooled, and that's important.
Until things start being real, it almost feels like a Scooby-Doo movie for a little while.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I wanted to say that of the 3 movies, they're the most interesting one to me because it felt like, I don't know, almost a subplot that's been needed in the slasher movies was the guy who actually managed to get out. And that
was different.
Right? He got out. He went to the police. He begged them for help, and they just dismissed him as a drunken college kid pulling a prank. And he's supposed to get the police involved in this initiation or whatever college bullshit's going on, and they dismiss him. And again, in another movie, he would have just thrown up his hands and given up. But the dude comes back and he shoots the lock out of the gate, and he almost gets killed climbing over the gate. Like, that whole odyssey of that guy going to get help and then coming back to try and help himself was maybe the only thing in this movie that felt original to me.
Yeah, it was surprising, and he actually comes back. That was different.
Yeah.
And, it comes back to almost save the day.
Yeah.
I'm not going to... obviously I liked Linda Blair in it a bit more than you did. I didn't really find anything to nitpick about her, but at the same time, I guess I don't want to oversell it.
Right.
But at the same time, I don't really want to talk shit about it either, because it feels like it's kind of a nice gem from the early 80s. It's an 80s movie made in the 80s, takes place in the 80s, but feels sort of like a gothic period. It's kind of cool, but if we were doing a ranking, it'd probably land somewhere in the middle for me, I think.
Right. Well, and again, I don't mean to, like, it's easy for me to pull the threads. These are the things that don't work for me. Part of my appeal for Hell Night was, this is a movie that I'd heard of for a really long time, that I've been aware of since I was a kid, but they didn't have it at my video store in small town Beaumont where I grew up, and I just never had seen it. It was one of these like stalwart 80s slasher movies that had slipped through the net, and I enjoyed it just because it was a new one. I recently did a review of The Initiation, which I had a similar response to. I might have liked The Initiation more than it was worth just because it was a new kind of entry into the form. I might actually argue that Hell Night is probably a more solidly put together movie than The Initiation was, but it didn't catch me as off guard as The Initiation did. So I just sort of felt like I was being put through the paces. I enjoyed it because I enjoy these types of movies, but it'd be hard to get enthusiastic about it. But I certainly don't want to talk anyone out of it. I would say if you like 80s slasher movies, definitely Hell Night's worth your time.
And the one thing that always stood out to me was the cover.
Yeah.
Going back to the VHS age, and even with the Blu-ray, same thing. But it's always just one of those covers that stood out to me, and just looking at it, saying, "Oh, what is this movie about? It's Hell Night." Jeez. For a long time, I remember I was not allowed to rent it because of the title and the cover. When I was young, what it looked like, it just looked like this terrifying film with Linda Blair holding this gate and hands reaching up to get her from the bottom. And
I love how much of an obstacle that gate really is in the movie, too.
It's almost scarier than the killers. And that is another twist, that they actually had, there was at least 2 killers in the movie, and that was kind of a surprise, unless you're listening to this podcast and haven't seen the movie yet. And the whole finale, I think, is well done. Her getaway.
Yeah.
Or, and the final scene, for that kind of thing, I think is done pretty strong.
Yeah.
I'm not really sure what to say. I mean, I like the film. I'll watch it again.
But it's kind of for us, right? It's right in our, absolute niche.
Yeah, it fits the mood.
Yeah. Do you believe in Bigfoot? If so, is he friend or foe?
Bigfoot is obviously real.
Okay.
And that's based on just it being obvious that he's real. That's it.
That's all. That's
and
really
friend or foe, I believe he would be a mixture. I'd say he's probably more like a reclusive bear that would rather be left alone, but if it felt threatened or if it felt like maybe it needed to attack you, it would. But I believe he just wants to be left with his own.
Okay. Well, I read
but
this.
Obviously, he's real.
He, obviously, clearly, unquestionably, absolutely
Yeah.
true. Okay. I just read this book by Max Brooks, the guy who did World War Z, son of Mel Brooks, funnily enough. It's called Devolution, and it's about a bunch of Bigfoots and a natural disaster driving them to starvation and attacking people.
A bunch of Bigfoots.
Or Sasquatch? What would you like? What's the
No, I just wonder if that's offensive to Bigfoot.
Bigfoot.
Like in 2021, should we be calling them that anymore?
Yeah, let's cancel me. Let's
I
cancel.
also have big arms and a big shoulder and a big head.
Dude,
You just focus on my big feet.
I guarantee you I've said some shit on the podcast that has my ass so fucking in the fire. Whatever. I'm over it. We cannot turn the world into high school, okay? We can't just judge everybody for the stupidest thing that came out of their mouth.
I'm just waiting for...
You're just waiting?
Just waiting for someone to get in trouble for referring to them Bigfoot. We can't call them Bigfoot anymore.
No.
It's pretty insensitive.
It's disrespectful, and Sasquatch is kind of cultural appropriation. Just call them presumed subhuman. Way back in episode 50 of Rank and Review, I did an episode about Bigfoot with my good friend Brendan Cook. It's worth revisiting. I think it's a high-quality episode. And I said then that I am fascinated with Bigfoot. I've always been fascinated with Bigfoot. But I don't believe in Bigfoot. I am not a believer. I'm a want-to-be believer. Like a television show from my childhood, the X-Files. You know, I want to believe. I would love to be wrong about Bigfoot. But it seems like a lot of other things need to fall into place for Bigfoot to exist. Like, in order for a population of large mammal ape creatures to live in even the remotest regions of Canada or Russia or wherever and not be encountered by us in any conclusive physical way ever is tough. And to then otherwise go, well, they only get seen when they want to be seen, or they travel by portals, or they're supernatural, or that's kicking down a whole other set of doors. You know, that's when you're not... There's asking me if I believe in Bigfoot, and then there's asking me if I believe in wholesale the supernatural. I want to believe in Bigfoot. I just don't believe in the supernatural. But I love playing in that sort of fun, imaginary arena. I like a world where supernatural things exist. I kind of want a world where Bigfoot exists. I think that's part of my love of cinema and escapist media of all sorts, you know, is like, who wouldn't love to call a cab and have like some Fozzie Bear Muppet be your cab driver? And wouldn't that be a great conversation to have on your way to wherever you're going instead of the regular chatter? I want the world to be more than it seems to be or that it presents to be. And that's part of the escapist nature of, you know, cinema, or in the case of what I would like to start talking about here, Max Brooks' novel Devolution. And this book definitely believes in Bigfoot in that it treats it like a very serious document. We have diary entries from a survivor of a small community that was sieged by Bigfoot creatures, Sasquatches, whatever you want to call them, after a natural disaster takes place that ends up moving a large portion of the animals out of their regular terrain, and some of them starving, some of them, you know, desperate. Yeah, it's sort of a collision, a classic collision of man versus nature from the author of World War Z. I've told the story before. I'm going to tell it again because it's worth telling. A dear friend of mine, friend of the show, she's been on a couple of episodes, Dorian, she was at a Comic-Con and she met Max Brooks and she bought a copy, her own copy of World War Z, and he asked her where she got the book or how she'd heard about the book. She'd mentioned that she'd babysat for me and that I'd recommended she read the book and that she had, la la la. The man gave her a poster and signed it and asked her to give it to me, and Dorian, being the sweetheart that she is, delivered. So ever since that happened, I've decided I am absolutely a supporter of Max Brooks. I mean, I'd read his Zombie Survival Guide and World War Z because of who I am. But would I have continued forward with his books if they weren't zombie related, if not for that little story? I think this Bigfoot book might have caught my eye anyway, but right now I just consider myself a supporter of all things Max Brooks. He just seems like a cool guy, and it was easy to paint this picture of my head back when I was first reading his graphic novels and World War Z. You know, this is the son of Mel Brooks. He's got to be this grown-up, you know, spoiled Hollywood kid who gets to do whatever he wants, and it's going to be successful because of just the charmed position that he found himself in. And so he gets to write about zombies, and hooray. But this is a whole side project to a very fascinating life that this man is living, and he seems to genuinely be warm and respectful and appreciative of his fans. So I have a lot of respect. I say all this, and I haven't met the man. But let's get into Devolution. From the dust jacket of my hardcover edition of Devolution, the account of the Rainier Sasquatch Massacre. As the ash and chaos from Mount Rainier's eruption swirled and finally settled, the story of the Greenleaf Massacre has passed unnoticed, unexamined, until now. The journals of resident Kate Hollins, recovered from the town's bloody wreckage, capture a tale too harrowing and too earth-shattering in its implications to be forgotten. In these pages, Max Brooks brings Kate's extraordinary account to light for the first time. faithfully reproducing her words alongside his own extensive investigations into the massacre and the legendary beasts behind it. Kate's is a tale of unexpected strength and resilience, of humanity's defiance in the face of the terrible predator's gaze, and inevitably, of savagery and death. Yet it's also more than that, because if what Kate Holland saw in those days is real, then we must accept the impossible. We must accept that the creature known as Bigfoot walks among us, and that it is a beast of terrible strength and ferocity. Part survival narrative, part bloody horror tale, part scientific journey into the boundaries between truth and fiction, this is a Bigfoot story only as Max Brooke could chronicle it, and like none you've ever read before. The book is told as like an investigative journalistic sort of approach of an actual natural disaster. Mount Rainier erupted, and the fallout caused a lot of major arteries to be shut down, covered in dirt and sort of lava and destructive debris that was very hot and hard and muddy to get through, and slowly freezing into a shell of concrete, or sort of solidifying, not freezing. And, evacuations, trying to, get people who are trapped, find people who are missing, all sorts of things to deal with, as any major catastrophe, would be. And this tiny, relatively new community that's very eco-friendly, very modern, and sort of an idea of, like, the eco-friendly community of the future has settled deep in the woods and is kind of forgotten about in the midst of the chaos. They are completely cut off. We know the story of what's happened there because after the ruin of the area is found, all the burnt out cabins, a journal from this woman, Kate Holland, is found. And we follow her from her first moving in to the community, getting to know her neighbors, a lot of whom are kind of unpleasant portraits of very snooty, intellectually rich, loving the smell of their own farts sort of people that are communing with nature, but they're sort of wealthy snobs, and their privilege is very evident, and some of them are there for the right reasons, some of them are there for the wrong reasons, but and she's got a troubled relationship with her boyfriend who's had to deal with a lot of personal failures and is clearly depressed and kind of not really drag kicking and streaming, but he just doesn't have any personality or ability or animus left in him, and as a result she feels lonely here, and she bonds with very few of her neighbors, at least initially. But once they realize they're cut off, the novel becomes sort of a kind of condemnation of a lot of these people. Their survival ability is very, very minimal. They're very lucky for the handful of people that are capable, that live there. And most are. This one woman who's sort of a veteran of other catastrophes and has a really heavy past that the book slowly reveals to us. She knows, she sniffs the catastrophe in the air. She doesn't know that Bigfoot's coming, but she knows that they may be cut off for longer than they realize, and that their little perfect, easy living utopia dries up real quick when, the delivery vans with supplies don't, come in regularly. And then they start noticing that the animals passing through are impossibly skinny and fragile and desperate, and, they're seeing signs that, like, some sort of natural apocalypse has happened in the ecosystem, and it's definitely affected the animals' behavior. And they soon find out that the animals include Sasquatch. These Bigfoot come across this little community of people completely cut off, and in their desperate, on-the-move sort of pack-hunting need for survival, they see it as a potential food source. And they first sort of try and stay in the area and sniff it out and see how real this is, and you can sort of feel things escalating. And all of this is covered in the diary. We also have Max Brooks, the author, interviewing, some of the people who are dealing with the actual fallout of the Rainier eruptions, so like why they didn't get to the people right away, and different people studying about Sasquatches and stuff like that, why maybe help to make the case of why this is a more credible thing than maybe it sounds. He's really trying to ground the narrative in the real world, and that what sort of makes it really pleasant. If I have a complaint, I guess it's that, like, as far as the action and the meat and potatoes of the visceral confrontation and the horror, it's sort of a slow burn to get to that. But a lot of my favorite horror novels I've noticed are that way. Even, say, Stephen King's most notorious novel, Pet Sematary, is really the last third of the book is where everything bad really fully happens. But like that book, this movie, you know right away that it's going to lead to a tragedy, and you sort of feel all these dominoes being set and slowly starting to fall. And when the shit hits the fan, it is quite the story. It is quite horrifying. This is not Harry and the Hendersons Bigfoot. These are terrifying, aggressive animals, and they're smart, but not necessarily smarter than us. And if these people can, get together, maybe they can stick it out. So it's a fascinating, quick read. And there's also actually an audiobook version of it that's full of really interesting actors. I think Jeff Daniels and Nathan Fillion and Judy Greer are all supplying voices in it. He also did similar with World War Z. He's a really interesting audio version of that. So, if you want to have that audio experience, that's another way to enjoy the book. But I think it's great time. I think it's fun. I don't think it didn't necessarily make me stay up at night, but it definitely had some really good wowzers, shocking, sort of violent moments, and it's kind of refreshingly grisly in its approach to Bigfoot. So much of the Bigfoot fiction that I've read, they're kind of a little cuddlier, Not in this book. This book wants to be vicious. I guess the movie rights for the book have been optioned, so my guess is that we're going to be seeing a film version of it in the next few years, and I can't wait. But I can't recommend the book enough. It's a ton of fun. Also, interstitially, with like all of the different chapters and the interview segments and the diary entries, there's great little excerpts from other books and studies and scientific sort of historic interest items having to do with Sasquatch, little bite-sized things, and all of them I found quite fascinating. At first, Bowman could see nobody, nor did he receive an answer to his call. Stepping forward, he again shouted, and as he did, so his eye fell on the body of his friend, stretched beside the trunk of a great fallen spruce. Rushing towards it, horrified, the trapper found the body was still warm, but that the neck was broken, while there were 4 great fang marks in his throat. The footprints of the unknown beast creature, printed deep in the soft soil, told the whole story. The unfortunate man, having finished his packing, had sat down on the spruce log with his face to the fire and his back to the dense woods to wait for his companion. While thus waiting, this monstrous assailant, which must have been lurking nearby in the woods, waiting for a chance to catch one of the adventurers unprepared, came silently up from behind, walking with long, noiseless steps, and seemingly still on 2 legs. Evidently unheard, it reached the man and broke his neck by wrenching his head back with his forepaws, while it buried its teeth in his throat. It had not eaten the body, but apparently had romped and gamboled around in an uncouth, ferocious glee, occasionally rolling over and over it, and then had fled back into the soundless depths of the woods. President Theodore Roosevelt, the wilderness hunter.
This is the forest where the devil landed when he was cast out of heaven. And at that spot, we'll find the entrance to hell. the Antrum. The deeper we dig, the more the forest around us becomes darker. And with each layer that we pass, deeper in hell we'll be.
So speaking of all things uncertain and all things believed in but not known, Bigfoot does not exist, I don't particularly think. Ghosts do not exist. I'm sorry, but I don't think angels, as we imagine them, exist. But we love the idea that they exist. I mean, name a summer camp or a theater or a drama department that doesn't come with a ghost story or ghost sightings or a few years ago so-and-so saw that. Our willingness to buy into something has a lot to do with our desire to buy into something. I think that's why 15% of the population refuses to get a needle during a global pandemic, because for some reason they like the idea that they're smarter than every scientist and every medical practitioner in the world. We don't believe things because they're true. We believe things because we want to believe them. And I think that's the conceit in Antrum that is so romantic, for lack of a better word. Antrum, the most terrifying or dangerous film ever made, is made by a couple of Canadian filmmakers named David Amito and Michael Lacchini, and I really hope I'm saying their names right. And I guess maybe it's a little bit unfair to say that the concept, the idea, the sort of base premise of this movie is so strong that I give it a recommend and a positive review almost on the basis of that, more than some of the bells and whistles and approach taken to it. The idea is that this film, Antrum, has been rediscovered by these filmmakers, and we are getting to see it for the first time since all sorts of this terrible history. Festival people who had been privy to the film because of it being submitted ended up getting sick or dying. An entire theater burnt down that during a screening of it, apparently in 1988, and they build this whole rich history of the movie before they screen the movie. And I don't know, I like that they're sort of building in this sort of dense history to their movie. It reminds me of the promotion that went into the Blair Witch Project. For months before that movie came out, they seeded the airwaves and all of the nerd spheres, with lore of the Blair Witch. So before we see the film, we are presented with sort of faux documentary presentation of this is the lore of Antrum. This is the thing that you have to prepare yourself to see. In fact, they actually go hilariously so far as to show a warning up on the screen, and you're supposed to, rate it in and take it seriously. Before you watch Antrum, understand that you're taking a risk and that the producers are not responsible for what happens. Legal notice. By continuing to watch this film, you agree that the producers of this film have made you aware of the history and dangers associated with Antrum. The producers, distributors, cast, crew, unions, and theater management on all levels are released of all liability for any event that occurs to you during or after your screening, including but not limited to illness, injury, mortal danger, or death. If you disagree in any way with this notice, you must leave the theater now. I love the conceit. I love the idea. I love that the film Antrum was supposedly made in the late 70s, but its origin is kind of vague. I like that they know that the sound and the image has been messed with, but they're showing us the print as they have found it, and we have to sort of put it together ourselves. I guess the problem, if there is a problem beyond the, like I say, initial intriguing setup of the movie, is the movie itself. We have the story of a a woman and a little boy basically in the woods, and she's instructing them to do this weird ritual, and they seem to be actually attempting to make a portal or actually literally dig their way to hell. Why this is happening and the ins and outs of that is very slowly revealed, but this is a movie you experience that you don't necessarily understand. I think like a modern authentic equivalent to what they were attempting with the faux film is this movie Begotten by E. Elias Merhinge. It's like totally art fuck, bizarre, disturbing imageries with almost no story to go with it. And for some reason, it sort of amassed a bunch of fascinated followers who I think saw more to the movie than, in my personal opinion, was actually there. But it's really rough. It looks really cheap. It looks really, like, on one hand, amateur, but you can see a focus put into it. Like, whoever was making it had a vision, and they were bringing that vision forth, no matter how jittery or flawed it might be. And sure enough, in the film that we do see, they've gone a lot of ways to add grain and jitter and hair and damage to the film and weird jump cuts. And obviously they have, like, satanic imagery pop up and blip up on the screen here and there. But to my measure, I think they might have overplayed their hand on that end of the production. We get that it's a rickety old projector. We get why the color grade is different, why the images look softer, and we absolutely forgive it and go with it. But I think in their effort to make it look as old and beat up and rickety as possible, they may have overplayed it. I think generally speaking, where the film sort of has its missteps is when they just put a little bit too much gas in the tank. For instance, in the documentary portion of the film, the narrator, I think there's something about the way it's very authentic to the kind of cheesy narration that we would get in these true crime or quote-unquote true haunting documentaries that you see. But there's something where the narrator is trying to make the story sound more sinister when the story all by itself is purely sinister enough. You know, you're telling us names and dates of people who saw the movie and who subsequently died within 48 hours, and bringing up this sort of large stack of evidence as to why the movie is supposedly cursed. I think maybe I was so interested in the fake documentary part of the movie that when the actual film started, I felt like I was kind of disappointed, like I wanted more about the film than I wanted to see the film itself. And even though it's just a mini movie within the 95 minutes, the movie itself probably maybe takes up 75 of the 95 minutes. I guess I'm minimally intrigued by, like, why are these people doing what they're doing and what's this going to lead up to, but it's not about the story. It's about the experience. It's about priming you to be scared and then putting this film in front of you. It's not necessarily truly a found footage movie in that way. It's much closer to a faux documentary, but it functions in the same way a found footage movie will, in that it's trying to sell you that this is all very real, and it's trying to make you use your own fears, your own psychology against yourself. So if the movie's not scary enough, you will make it scary enough. And I think a case could be made that they're over-relying on their audience to do that work for them. But this is just one man's opinion. The movie brings to mind a few other films, too. They actually, to their credit, mention themselves Ringu and Cigarette Burns from John Carpenter, which are about films that if you watch could potentially kill you. And I recently saw a French faux documentary called, I believe, Fury of the Demon on a similar subject. Also sort of, they're only faking their way through it. Within the film itself, they have all these chapters. I don't know if it's supposed to represent them getting closer to the climax or closer to the pits of hell. There's just a couple of scenes where, like, we see a dark hand turning the page, or they bring us back to that book. They show the book, and this is unfair on the movie, but it's just true. It reminded me of Monty Python and the Holy Grail, where we would cut to the pages of the book, and in one shot, for whatever reason, a gorilla turns the page of the book, and all of a sudden it introduced this absurdity, or it reminded me of absurdity, which started some dominoes falling, which, you know, sort of laid bare the absurdity of the entire movie. I love the ideas, the ambition, more than I love the execution. But I love the ideas and ambition so much that I'm absolutely going to recommend the movie. They go on to ideas such as auditory illusions or auditory hallucinations that can be brought about by subsonic frequencies, and there's reality to that, but I think more so than there's more and less to it than they're letting on. And I don't know, it's just, if art can heal or be used as a power to cheer someone up or bring them out of a dark spot or distract them from their problems, what's wrong with the idea that it wouldn't be able to hurt somebody, wouldn't be able to be used as a psychologically damaging tool if someone focused their will and their education and their ability to make a film to do nothing but that. Some argue that's how Adam Sandler makes his career.
One by one we pray to thee.
One by one we pray to thee.
Protect us from all we'll see.
Protect us from all we'll see.
From all we'll hear and touch and smell.
From all we'll hear and touch and smell.
From all the unknown dark in hell.
From all the unknown dark in hell.
Together now. One by one we pray to thee. Protect us from all we'll see. From all we'll hear and touch and smell. From all the unknown dark in hell. One by one we pray to thee. Protect us from all we'll see. From all we'll hear and touch and smell. From all the unknown dark in hell.
One by one we pray to thee. Protect us from all we'll see. From all we'll hear and touch and smell. From all the unknown dark in hell.
One by one we pray to thee. Protect us from all we'll see. From all we'll hear and touch and smell. From all the unknown dark in hell.
It's just interesting. This is not a nostalgic movie. It's not a retro movie, but it's something new from that idea. It's something made new out of something that was old. And I respect it. I wanted to be a low-budget filmmaker. I have made a micro-budget film, and some of the biggest things is to have a big idea that doesn't require a big budget. And this was one of those. And I don't mean to be saying that it wasn't successful. I do think it mostly was. But I think that if it had narrowed its view, or even maybe just focused on being the faux documentary and showed us clips from the movie instead of the movie in its entirety, they really could have. There's another cut of all of this stuff that is perfect. This is intriguing. It'll leave you thinking. It'll, stick in your craw a little bit. And especially if you love old 80s and 70s sort of micro-budget films that have that grungy quality to them, they're definitely loyal to that. But the movie just sparks your imagination. And if this, maybe there's a better cut somewhere in my mind, there's a lot of movies like that. I have such respect for these guys getting this movie made, and I hope this kicks down some doors for them. Step one, make your movie. Step two, and as I've learned, maybe the harder step, finding people to watch it. I watched Antrum and I liked it, and I think you should watch Antrum as well.
She was in a car accident like a year ago, before we worked here. I'd love it if my boyfriend tried to kill himself because I died.
Has anyone ever told you you're a really weird little girl?
You won't be able to fix it, Molly.
You're my boyfriend's dead ex-girlfriend.
I'm not an ex.
You're dead.
I don't know if it's just the generation I was a part of, or maybe it's just the people I grew up around, but I must confess that from a young age, I've been a very uptight person when it came to sexuality. There's all sorts of guilt charged around it. Like, obviously, I saw the appeal of ladies, I was attracted to it, but the idea of recognizing that, of looking at that, of quote-unquote gawking, or, recognizing the physical beauty of a woman instead of, the full package. A lot of guilt was sort of wrapped up in that for me. And I guess it's stuck around for a really long time, because I look at movies that are overly sexualized, especially in my post-adolescence, with a little bit of, I don't know, the same measure of disdain that a lot of people will treat with slasher movies. Is that really completely necessary? And the short answer to that question, as far as I'm concerned, is yes. If we're going to, study this bizarre experience that is existence, that is being a living human person, enduring the experience of life, sex is a big part of that. And to pretend that that doesn't exist, to not let that card be played because it makes some people uncomfortable, is silly. Case in point for this, a comic book series that I could have been into for a good decade already, that because the covers threw me off, I ignored, is called Hack and Slash. And it's got this, crazily sexualized, scantily clad woman on the cover of every issue. And it's selling you this thing. It's selling you this issue or this image of what it is inside the issue. And it's not that at all. It's actually much smarter and much more horror savvy, and really knows its audience. It knows that its audience likes the horror conventions, including the sexuality, and uses it to its benefit. And if I didn't have my own personal misgivings and hang-ups, maybe I wouldn't be so judgmental about it. Maybe I would have found it sooner. By the way, if you haven't read Hack and Slash, please do. And feel no guilt, feel no shame. This goes on to the movies, too. I mean, there was a movie called The Devil's Rock, which had a really cheesy cover, and I ended up getting it just on a lark because I needed, 5 movies for $25 or whatever the deal was I was getting. That just filled the space for me, and who knows, maybe it will overperform. And you know what? It really did. It wasn't necessarily false advertising, but it wasn't what I thought it would be either. Which brings us to Nina Forever. Here is a horror comedy, satire, I don't know what you would call it, romance, dramedy. It's all over the place. But it opens on a man so damaged by the loss of his beloved, that she's died before the movie started, that he's attempted suicide. That's where we start. This is the power that Nina had over him, that he seems to not be able to live without her. Is that healthy? Is that the way any person should be? I think the obvious answer to that is, well, no. But I think that everybody's been in a place where they've had their heart broken, and they know what that feels like. They know how hard it is to get over something when you've invested so much into it. So Holly, who works with this young man, Rob is the character's name, works with him at a grocery store while she's training to become a medic. She gets this hopeless crush on him. And honestly, the suicide, the tragic romance, the fact that he is living in mourning is strangely part of the attraction for Nina. And she finally wears him down, gets his attention, finds her way into his apartment, into his arms, and into his bed. And that's when things get really complicated. Nina manifests as the broken, bloody corpse from the car accident that killed her in bed with them. Manifests physically broken, bloody, naked around them. And it's not a one-time thing. It's not a one-time visitation. Anytime these people get physically intimate, Nina manifests and says horrible things both to Holly and Rob, and seems to want to continue the relationship, but she doesn't have anything to offer. She keeps saying that she's dead and that's inevitable and that she has nothing more to play, and yet she keeps on playing. She keeps on messing with their relationship. And no matter what they do, which includes dark things like making love on her gravestone, they can't shake Nina.
Good old shit's young. Naked you could pass for 16.
You're not old.
No. I'm dead.
If I was just his old girlfriend, then I could see why you get your frothy little hopes up, but... Come on. That first morning, when I was naked in the sunshine by the window, pushing his hands into the sand as we fucked on the beach in Cornwall. Oh, the time I went down on him on the sofa in my parents' front room just before we met them for the first time. These things will stay in his head precisely because I am dead. You're an oil painting that's still wet. Any good memories you slather out will just get mushed in by what happens next. I have no next.
Nina. Holly's my girlfriend now. Don't know how we're going to deal with this situation. That's just how it is.
No, it isn't. We never broke up.
You died. Couldn't.
Did you want to?
No.
Well then.
I'm breaking up with you now.
You can't.
What do you mean? Why not?
Because I'm dead.
A lot of compliments have to go to Fiona O'Shaughnessy, who plays Nina, Abigail Hardingham, who plays Holly, and Cian Barry, who plays Rob, because these are incredibly brave performances from incredibly bold actors. They are naked a lot of the time. They are covered in blood a lot of the time. It could not have been a comfortable thing to shoot being on set. They're not alone. They're surrounded by other people. But what I respect so much about Nina Forever is what psychologically dense piece it is, and how a movie that you could look at and say, ooh, kinky sex and violence, a zombie sex movie, la 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 la. It's not. It's about grief. It's about mourning. It's about Rob dealing not only with Nina, but with her family, who he still has attachments to, and how that's a good thing for them and their grief, but maybe not helping him. His dealing with the fact that even in death, his ex-girlfriend can't let go of her, even when he was right about ready to let go of her himself. Like, she won't let him go, but he was trying so hard to let her go. But even more interesting is that Abby, or Abigail, she has her own issues and her own cards to play. Pardon me, Holly's the character's name. Abigail is the actress's name. Sorry, you guys. Holly's problem is that she's as hung up about the Nina thing as Rob was, because she was part of the attraction. She was the whole reason that she originally hooked up with this guy. This romantic, this deep, passionate love that he had, that she kind of wanted from him, that she wanted to harness, whether it was a conscious thing or not. His brokenness, his misery was the appeal. And Nina's not going to let that misery end. But interestingly, as the story progresses, it's not necessarily Rob's misery that she won't let end. It's actually Nina's. As Nina tries to seek other partners, as Holly tries to seek out other partners, Nina continues to manifest. Even though this has nothing to do with her ex-boyfriend anymore. Even though, he's not even present. She didn't have the pre-existing relationship with Nina, but Nina is haunting her as much or arguably more than her ex-boyfriend, or boyfriend as she considers herself. I think that there's a shot, not really mentioned, but since we see so much skin on all of the actors, we notice that Ben has this tattoo on his back, which says the title of the movie, Nina Forever. And we see that she notices it too, that Holly recognizes that, and that's almost like a stamp of property that Nina has on him, and that she is envious of. So there's a lot going on in this movie that you wouldn't necessarily see immediately just looking at the case. And frustratingly, it's really a hard movie to put your hands to, at least in Canada. I don't know if there's a streaming service or somewhere that has it, but me being a collector of the physical medium, I can find it in their region if I want to overpay for it, but I've never been able to find a copy of it here. And I saw the movie, and I really liked it, and I wanted to spread the word on it, and frustrating. Is it perfect? Well, if I had some complaints about the movie, it would be when it's not saying something interesting, when it doesn't have a big plot point scene or a really character-driven scene, it seems to forget script a little bit, and it over-relies on so-so pop songs and montages to show us time going by of them walking, contemplating, trying to deal with it. They didn't find any dialogue or any sort of quiet way to show us this, and they kind of repeat that trick over and over again. But in between the montage of pop music that you may or may not like, there are, again, very honest, frank psychological discussions and very quite graphic, intensely sexual situations that envelop. Out of desperation, they even try to include her in the sex. And, I don't know if I'm visualizing this for you, but, Nina's bloody. It's gory. So they're getting blood smeared all over them, they're rolling around in the bed, and they're still trying to make it work. What scenario will present itself to the human being who's in love that will stop them from trying to make it work? This movie is deep, it's smart, and it is erotic, and it is disturbing, and it is criminally underseen. Check it out.
Isabella Johnny, the internationally acclaimed actress in her most explosive, controversial role. Sam Neill, Heinz Bennett, two men, and a woman no man could ever possess. Special visual effects by Academy Award winner Carlo Rambaldi. Mortal terror. Inhuman ecstasy. Soon you will know the meaning of possession.
It wasn't even human.
Intentionally or not, I may be curating, as a podcast host, this reputation of a little bit of snobbishness when it comes to certain elements of horror movies. It's weird because whereas I will make all sorts of excuses for a slasher movie or a slasher sequel or a no-budget monster movie, I'm really prickly when it comes to things like, for instance, David Lynch. More often than not, I end up frustrated by a David Lynch movie. Instead of leaving me in a place of awe and wonder, I feel frustrated and kind of angry sometimes, whereas, as I've said before in the podcast, I don't have to understand everything about your film. I don't have to have it all figured out, but I have to believe that you do. I was hard on the most recent Charlie Kaufman movie. Even though I liked it, I kind of picked on it a little bit. Especially if you're going to be all abstract and weird and stuff, it seems a strange choice to adapt someone else's work only to willfully fuck with it. I mean, honor the original work, right? To some degree. And maybe a case can be made that he did that. I haven't read the source material. Later on in this season of Rank and Review, there's going to be an episode all about art horror. And there's some selections in there that I will talk nicely about and some that I won't. But I want to sort of try and shake this reputation that I don't like an artistic horror movie or that I dismiss it as pretentious. The best evidence of this is this movie I want to talk about right now called Possession from 1981. To my mind, the movie Possession is everything that the Lars von Trier piece of shit Antichrist was trying to be. Only in every way that that movie failed and offended, this movie succeeds and sort of stimulates the brain. Like, I don't understand everything that happens in Possession, but I'm wrestling with it, and I'm wrestling with it for a long time. And to say that the movie is ahead of its time would be, I think, a crazy understatement. But it's a hard movie to break down. Like, if I try to tell you the plot right now, like, it's a very European movie. It's set somewhere European. This woman has been alone for a long time. Her husband's been away at the wars, so to speak. He's actually like a spy, but he's been away, and she's been home, and she's been lonely, and there's all sorts of questions being posed, like, this was the life that she wanted, but now that she had it, she didn't enjoy it. She should be happy that her husband is home, but it's only punctuating that she's been sitting around waiting for a life that she didn't really want. The conflict, the friction, and the divorce that's going to be coming between these two people, and the serious psychological and emotional damage that's done to both of them, how it turns both of them into monsters and makes both of them kind of create monsters within themselves, or in some aspects of the film, literally creating a monster, this weird squid-like Lovecraftian creation. But what does it all mean, you know? Were they destined to be together, and that's their personal hell? Were they destined to be apart, and that was their personal hell? What does it say about relationships? The Sam Neill, the male member of this relationship, he's got all this passion, this intense love and need for his wife, but he's also got this anger in him, this meanness, and this need to inflict it upon her. And she has become so disgusted with him that she actually enjoys hurting him and admits as much. Is this all coming from her, or is there something else? Is she being possessed by madness, or are they possessing each other? What does the title of the movie, Possession, mean? And I don't know how you say, Isabelle Adjani is the name of the actress. She gives an amazingly fragile and yet strong, terrifying and yet, I don't know, bold, and she's falling apart, but she's clinging to her humanity, such as it is, as best as she can. And the over-the-top, almost grotesque theatricality of the performances are, no other movie could house them. You know, when you really swing for the fences like this, and when you set your movie in sort of inside a concept instead of inside of the real world, it sort of makes everything is on the table that way. No performance is necessarily unjustified. Nothing is too big. So we start with this, I guess, a love triangle. She admits that she's been having an affair and that she wants out of the relationship. There's friction between the two men in the relationship, but then there's also the mystery of her, where she's disappearing to, and this creature that she has created, but she has a more than motherly relationship to. It's like a lot of European horror movies, implicitly sexual whenever it can be. She hates her husband, but she's still connected with her husband. She hates her husband, and yet the creature that she creates ends up taking the shape and form of her husband. She is disgusted and crazed with what's happening to her, and yet she will kill people to defend the life that she has chosen and the path that she is on. Like, what do we do to each other? Like, falling in love is this big romantic thing, but when you are really all in, when you invest heart and soul into somebody and it doesn't work, what becomes of you? And I talk about all of this, and I haven't even gotten to the absolutely crazy, crazy finale of the movie. And a lot of times, like, I warn of spoilers. Everyone knows to listen to the show, I give spoilers. I don't even know if this movie can be spoiled, because it's not how it ends, it's what the ending means. There ends up being a couple of murders have taken place, and the couple are sort of having one final conflict, and the husband meets this doppelganger creature that has been, I guess, maybe created, either manifest in reality or just in her mind, but other people seem to be able to see it. Anyway, they're gunned down by the police. So the police have been called to a terrible fight or violence that's taking place, and our two main characters are riddled with bullets, but the creature, the creation, seems unmoved, untouched by the bullets. And the female character, she ends up killing herself, strangely, by shooting herself in the back. And the husband ends up falling or jumping or committing suicide. And as the credits roll and this creature that they've created out of the death of their love is free to roam the world, one wonders, what did all of this mean? There's an absolutely famous sequence with the young woman, Johnny, walking through a tunnel in a subway station and having an absolutely traumatizing, terrorizing flip out. She smashes her groceries against the wall, milk and eggs spill everywhere, and these fluids, these milky fluids, start falling out of her, all of her orifices, and she makes this writhing, horrendous mess. The courage of that performance and the conviction of the storytelling. And yet, as I stand here enthusiastically telling you about it, I don't know what all of it means. I know that it's fascinating. I know that the director was writing a treatise on divorce and how men and women treat each other, and sort of the deeper, uglier depths of dealing with that kind of depression can be. Everything, as I said, that Lars von Trier was trying to do and failing with Antichrist. Here we see it loud and proud. There are no easy answers. Hell, in this subject, there might not even be any easy questions. But this is a fascinating movie. This, Possession from 1981, is art horror.
Will you move in with him or keep the apartment?
I'll keep it if you allow me to.
I've decided not to see Bob.
At all?
At all.
How can you say that?
He's gonna be fucked up enough as it is, and I don't want to fuck him up even more by playing Sunday Daddy.
What were you to him anyway?
Precisely.
But he knows you. He's yours. He needs you.
A real father, full time? Well, I thought I could be coming out from the wars, so to speak. You say it's better with him than with me?
I get more out of it.
So I'm saying, I guess, if you want me to be on side, if you're, the next Nicholas Rendon Refn art fuck horror movie, or the next Lars von Trier art fuck horror movie, or the next David Lynch art fuck horror movie, instead of scene for scene trying to wow the audience with how, abstract, opaque, and challenging everything is, find a subject, find a theme, and use your grotesquerie, use your abstractions to explore that theme. It doesn't all have to all fit together perfectly. I just have to believe that you had an intention, a master plan. Otherwise, I think I've made this analogy before on the podcast. I feel it's like a kid who went into the fridge and took everything out and put it into a blender, mixed it, and then forced us to drink it. And because it's just a little kid, we just say, oh, that's really good for you. Or because we're too ashamed to admit that we don't understand these intense flavors, we just say, wow, that's really different, that's really interesting. Yeah, there's a place for different and there's a place for interesting. But the main job of cinema, God damn it, is to entertain. Entertain me and stimulate my brain and be smart and be weird and be out there. But for the love of God, at least pretend that you have a point. Possession has reinvigorated my love for art horror, so I'm happy and enthusiastic to talk about it. It was an absolutely painless bunker review because there's just not enough and yet too much to say about it, Everybody's interpretation will be their own, and that's valid. Whereas in other films, I will say everybody's interpretation would be their own because there's no interpretation to be found. If it means everything, it means nothing. Do you know what I'm saying? So I want movies to mean something, and I want them to entertain. And I don't think that's too much to ask. So to address some business that I probably should have addressed in the introduction, Liz Dexia strikes again. I'm sorry, you guys. If I was perfect, I'd be boring. And I'm assuming you don't think that I'm boring since you've listened this far into the podcast. But the movies and the novel that you just heard review were in order: Mr. Frost, Sputnik, Hell Night. The novel was Devolution by Max Brooks, Antrum, Nina Forever, and Possession. Those were the 7 subjects of this 4th bunker episode. And just for the uninitiated, in October of 2020, I watched 31 movies, read 3 books, and watched the first entire season of the original Twilight Zone, and compiled notes for all of those reviews all at once in order to be able to produce 5 episodes for my podcast, which I've been having trouble getting recordings done and been having technical audio issues with. So this was a noble experiment, and the degree of success, well, I will ask you guys. If I was to rank these movies, I know I don't have anyone to rank with, but just for shits and giggles, I would go in 6th place Hell Night, in 5th Antrum, 4th Sputnik, 3rd Nina Forever, 2nd Mr. Frost, a lot of nostalgia involved in that one for me particularly, and in 1st place Possession. But I actually did enjoy watching all of the movies and really enjoyed reading that book, so you can consider this entire episode recommendations. See? That was not bad, right? I don't need guests all the time. I can talk to you guys about horror movies. I'm getting more comfortable. I'm getting my game. But I'm always willing to hear feedback, so if you want to tell me how I did this episode of Rank and Review, this particular bunker episode, am I getting better, am I getting worse? You can do that by writing me at rankandreview@gmail.com. ranknrevieu@gmail.com. The website is rankandreview.ca because I am Canadian. Thank you so much for your ears. If you want another show to listen to, I invite you to check out the Shelf Shedding Movie Show or the Terror Table Podcast, a couple of other Saskatoon-based podcasts. And thank you so much for listening. Tell that other movie nerd in your life about the show. That would make you a friend. I mean, you listen to the show, you're already a friend, but you know what I mean. See you in a couple weeks.